My name is Nora Vance. I am 35 years old. I am sitting at my desk on the third floor of the Fairfax County Government Center at 6:12 on a Tuesday evening, the overhead lights already dimmed to the after-hours setting, a mug of coffee gone cold at my elbow, when my phone lights up on the desk beside a folder marked anniversary, 30 years in my mother's handwriting. The folder has been sitting there for 3 days. I have not opened it because I already know roughly what it will say. I am wrong about that. It is worse than I imagined. The text is in the family group chat, the one with 11 people in it, the one my mother uses like a bulletin board. It reads, *family in good standing only for Saturday. No broke cousins, please. This is a milestone, not a soup kitchen. 30 seconds later, my brother Mitchell adds his own line underneath it, visible to everyone, including our aunts, including my father. Honestly, Nora, just stay home. Save everyone the awkwardness. I read it twice. Then I set the phone face down on the desk next to the folder I still have not opened, and I did not answer. I want to tell you how we got to this moment because the text did not start it. It only confirmed something that had been true in that family for 11 years, since I was 24 years old, sitting in my parents' kitchen in Great Falls, Virginia, with an eviction notice folded into my coat pocket, listening to my mother tell my aunt on the phone that I had always been the one who didn't have the sense God gave a goose. I remember the exact phrase. I remember the dish towel in her hand, and the way she didn't lower her voice even though I was standing 4 feet away, rinsing a coffee cup I didn't need to rinse. That was the year everything came apart for me. The year I lost the paralegal job when the firm folded. The year I slept on my friend Colleen's couch for 5 months. The year my mother told anyone who would listen that I had made choices. She never asked what the choices were. She never asked what happened. She decided once in a single conversation what kind of person I was, and she has not updated that decision since. Not once, not in 11 years, not through law school at night, not through the bar exam I passed on my second attempt at 29, not through 4 years as a county zoning aide, not through anything. Before I tell you what happened in that room, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching from right now, and what time is it where you are? I want to see how far this story travels before the end. There was a family council that same year, though nobody would have called it that at the time. My mother's 2 sisters and my father's brother gathered at the dining room table under the guise of checking in, the good china out for people who hadn't been offered coffee in years. My Uncle Howard did most of the talking. We just thought it made more sense for someone to keep an eye on things while you get back on your feet, he said, sliding a legal pad across the table with a list of my obligations written in my mother's handwriting, as if a family could vote on what a grown woman owed it. I signed nothing. I did not raise my voice. I told them I'd think about it, and then I drove to Colleen's apartment and did not think about it again for a decade. My father, Dennis, has never disagreed with her out loud. Not once, in my hearing. He is not cruel the way she is. He is absent the way a supporting beam is absent once you've already knocked it out. When my mother says something like, she's never really applied herself, my father nods, or he changes the subject to the Nationals game, or he asks if anyone wants more potatoes. He has spent 30 years agreeing by staying quiet, and I used to think that made him the gentler parent. It took me a long time to understand that his silence and my mother's certainty were the same instrument, played in 2 different keys. And then there is Mitchell, 38, 2 years older than me, a regional sales manager for a commercial flooring company, married to a woman named Brooke who posts their vacations before they've finished unpacking. Mitchell has always been the family's proof of concept, the one my mother introduces first at parties, the one whose promotions get announced over Easter dinner like weather reports. Mitchell is not a bad man. He is a comfortable one. Comfort in that family has always required someone to be beneath it, and for 11 years, that someone has been me. The pattern held at every family occasion that followed. At Mitchell's promotion dinner 2 years later, my mother stood and toasted him for finally making something of himself, unlike some people in this family, and 30 relatives laughed the polite laugh people give when they've decided not to notice who the joke landed on. I raised my glass with everyone else. I said nothing. I reached for the breadbasket instead because by then I had learned that a full mouth is the fastest way to end a conversation you were never going to win by talking. I did not tell them when I passed the bar. I did not tell them when the county hired me into the planning office. I stopped telling them things around the same time I stopped expecting them to ask, because every piece of good news I brought to that kitchen table got quietly filed under coincidence, or about time, or more often, simply ignored in favor of whatever Mitchell had done that week. So I made a decision sometime around year 6 that I would stop narrating my own life to people who had already written the ending. I would just live it. What none of them knew, what none of them had bothered to ask in 11 years, was what I had actually built in that silence. I had spent 4 years as a zoning aide learning the county from the inside, sitting through hundreds of hours of planning commission meetings that put me to sleep at my own kitchen table more nights than I want to admit. I learned how a county actually runs, not the version people complain about at dinner parties, but the real one, the one made of easement requests and stormwater ordinances and budget line items that decide whether a road gets repaved or a family gets displaced. I learned it the way you learn a language, by living inside it, badly at first, then less badly, until one day you're not translating anymore. I took the bar exam, the first time 3 weeks after finishing my last night class, sitting in a testing center in Fairfax at 5:47 on a Wednesday morning because the parking lot filled by 6, and I couldn't afford to be late after working a full shift the day before. I failed by 11 points. I told no one but Colleen. I took it again the following February and passed, and the only person who found out was the county HR office, because I needed the license on file to apply for the zoning aide job I actually wanted. My mother has never once asked whether I passed the bar. She has, twice, asked Mitchell whether his company's stock options had vested. 2 years ago, when the commissioner for our district announced she wasn't running again, 3 people who had watched me work, my old boss, a woman named Rosa, who ran constituent services, and a retired judge named Priya Anand, who I'd met when she chaired a housing task force I staffed, sat me down in a diner off Route 7 and told me I should run. I laughed. I told them I didn't have the money, the name, or the family behind me that a campaign like that needs. Rosa looked at me and said something I still carry. You've been doing the job without the title for 4 years. The title is the easy part. I ran a campaign built on a laptop, a card table at 3 farmers markets, and the money I'd saved instead of spent. $63,500 a year is not a fortune, but I hadn't touched a cent of my savings on anything but the bar exam and rent, and 11 years of restraint turns out to be its own kind of war chest. I did not tell my family I was running. I told exactly 4 people. Colleen, Rosa, Judge Anand, and my father's sister, my Aunt Janet, who had quietly slipped me $200 for yard signs and asked me not to mention it to my mother. I knocked on doors after work in a district I could have drawn from memory, held a folding table outside the Vienna and Herndon farmers markets on Saturday mornings with a stack of one-page flyers and a coffee thermos, and learned the particular loneliness of standing behind a card table while people you've never met decide, in 4 seconds, whether you're worth stopping for. Most of them stopped. I remember a retired schoolteacher named Colleen, a different Colleen, not my friend, who squeezed my hand at a debate watch party in October and said, "You explain things like someone who's actually done the job, not read about it." I held on to that sentence longer than I probably should have, on nights when the fundraising emails went unanswered and the yard signs kept disappearing from a particular cul-de-sac 2 streets from my parents' house. I won the seat by 412 votes in November, and I was sworn in on a Thursday morning in January that my family did not attend because they did not know it was happening. Judge Priya Anand, who by then had been appointed to the federal bench, administered the oath herself in a wood-paneled hearing room that smelled of old carpet and fresh coffee, with my hand on a Bible that had belonged to her grandmother. Afterward, she shook my hand and said, "Your family's going to be very surprised, Commissioner Vance." And I remember thinking, they are not going to know for a while yet. I wasn't ready. I wanted it to be mine first before it became something they could take credit for or dismiss, or both at once. For 8 months, I have sat on the board of supervisors for the district that includes the very neighborhood my parents live in. I have voted on the budget that funds the county library branch 2 miles from their house. I have stood in front of rooms of 300 people and answered hard questions about zoning and traffic and school funding. In July, I cast the deciding vote against a variance request that would have let a developer put 22 townhomes on a flood-prone lot 2 miles from my parents' street, and a woman I'd never met stood up afterward and thanked me by name for reading the engineering report herself instead of taking the developer's word for it. I have gone home afterward to an apartment my mother has never once visited, and I have said nothing about any of it at a single family dinner. Not out of shame. Out of something closer to patience. I wanted to see how far their certainty would go without a single fact to check it against. It turns out, all the way to a group text with 11 people on it. The anniversary dinner had been building for months before that text arrived. 30 years of marriage, a milestone my mother had been narrating on social media since spring. A private room booked at the River Bend Country Club in McLean, 40 guests, a photographer, a band. I knew about it the way you know about weather in another city, present but not touching me. I assumed, if I thought about it at all, that I would get a seat near the kitchen door, the way I had at my cousin's wedding 2 years earlier, seated at a table with the caterer's assistant and a second cousin's plus one nobody could place. I had made my peace with that seat. I had not made my peace with being told not to come at all. I found out later from Janet how the guest list had actually been decided. My mother had stood in her kitchen with a spreadsheet open on her laptop and said, to anyone listening, "It's not personal. It's just that this is a night for family who are actually doing well. The Hendersons will be there, the Okafors, people from the club. It's just easier if certain people sit this one out." Nobody in that kitchen asked her to define certain people. Nobody needed to. It was my brother's line that did it, if I'm honest, not my mother's. My mother's cruelty has always come wrapped in a kind of performance, something she can later claim she didn't mean like that. Mitchell's was flat, unadorned. Save everyone the awkwardness. 11 people saw it. My Aunt Janet saw it. My father saw it and said nothing, which by now I understood was its own kind of vote. I did not respond to the group chat. I did not call my mother. I did not call Mitchell. I put my phone in my bag, finished the memo I'd been drafting on a stormwater easement dispute, and drove home along Route 7 with the radio off, past the exit for River Bend Country Club, past the turn for my parents' street, all the way to my own apartment, where I sat at my kitchen table for a long time without turning on the lights. I did not answer. That was the whole of my reply for 3 days. What I did instead was quieter than anything they would have expected, and it started with a single phone call the next morning, not to my mother, not to Mitchell, but to Priya. I told her about the text. I read it to her out loud, and there was a long pause on the line before she said, "Read me the second one again." I did. Another pause. Then she said, "What time is the dinner, Nora?" I told her 7 o'clock, Saturday, River Bend Country Club, the Ashcombe Room. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said the thing that decided everything that came after. "I have a Federal Bar Association dinner Saturday night I've been trying to get out of for a month. It's 20 minutes from McLean. I could use a good reason to leave early." I understood what she was offering before she finished the sentence, and I sat with it for a long moment before I said yes. I did not tell my Aunt Janet. I did not tell Colleen, not yet. I called the front desk at the county clerk's office and requested a certified copy of the swearing-in record, a formality, something I'd never bothered to obtain for myself, filed away the way you file away a birth certificate you assume you'll never need. I picked it up on Thursday afternoon, a single embossed page in a county folder, and I put it in the leather portfolio I have carried since law school, the one worn soft at the corners, the one with my initials pressed into the flap, so faintly now that you have to know they're there to see them. There are things you carry not because you need them, but because putting them down would mean admitting you were never going back. I did not sleep well those 3 nights. Not from doubt about what I was going to do. That part had settled almost immediately, but from the strange, low hum of anticipation that comes from finally letting a decision you've delayed for 11 years become a decision you're actually going to keep. I kept the portfolio on my kitchen counter where I could see it, the leather catching the kitchen light every time I walked past, a small private confirmation that this was real and not something I'd talk myself out of by Saturday morning the way I'd talked myself out of smaller confrontations 100 times before. On Friday, I called the club myself and confirmed, without explaining why, that the reservation under Vance included a +1. It did. I had been added to the guest list 11 months ago, when my mother built the spreadsheet, long before either text was sent, a detail she'd forgotten or never bothered to update, because removing someone from a spreadsheet has never occurred to my mother as urgent when a group text does the job for free. I called Priya back Friday night. 7 o'clock, I said. "I'll meet you in the lobby at 6:45. She said, I'll wear the good coat. And I laughed for the first time in 3 days. Saturday came in gray and warm, the kind of late September evening in Northern Virginia where the humidity hasn't fully broken and the light goes long and gold around 6. I got ready slowly. I did not rehearse anything to say because I had decided somewhere around Thursday that I was not going to say much of anything at all. The room was going to say it for me. I arrived at the River Bend Country Club at 6:52 in the evening, the valet stand busy with cars, string lights already lit along the portico, even though the sun hadn't fully set. Priya arrived 4 minutes later in a black town car, stepping out in the coat she'd promised, federal judge written into the posture of her the way it's written into some people's, whether they mean it to be or not. We walked in together. The hostess at the Ashcombe room checked the list, found Vance, +1, and waved us through without a second glance, because on paper, we were exactly who we said we were. The Ashcombe rooms smelled the way expensive rented rooms always do, lilies from the centerpieces, warm bread from the kitchen, a faint trace of candle wax from the votives lining the gift table. Somewhere under the band soundcheck, a string quartet track played low from a speaker no one had bothered to turn off. The room was already full, 40 guests, round tables dressed in white, a slideshow of my parents' wedding photos looping on a screen near the band. My mother was near the center of the room in a navy dress, laughing at something my Aunt Patricia had said, a glass of champagne in her hand. Mitchell stood near the bar with Brooke, mid-story, the kind of story where he does the voices. The room noticed us before my mother did. That's the part one hadn't planned for and will never forget. The way a room can turn its attention like a single organism, table by table, toward two women walking in together, one of them unmistakably, structurally a federal judge, and the way that attention moved toward my mother a full 3 seconds before she looked up herself, as if the room already understood something she hadn't yet. My mother turned. Her eyes found me first, then moved to Priya, then came back to me with a confusion that hadn't yet located itself as fear. "Nora," she said, and her voice did something I had never heard it do. It went up at the end, uncertain, the way it never was with me. "I didn't think you were coming," I said. "I know. I got the message." I let that sit for exactly as long as it needed to. I did not raise my voice. I reached for the small clutch I was carrying instead, opened it, and drew out the folded page from my portfolio, not dramatically, just the way you'd hand someone a receipt. Rosa, who I'd invited without telling my mother, stepped up beside me from where she'd been seated near the back, an old family friend on paper, a witness by design. "Diane," she said gently to my mother, "I don't think you two have officially met. This is Judge Priya Anand." She turned. "Priya, this is Nora's mother, Diane." My mother's hand found the stem of her champagne glass, like it was the only stable object in the room. "Judge," she repeated. The word came out smaller than she meant it to. Nora clerked for the housing task force I chaired. Priya said, easy, unhurried, the voice of someone who has spent 20 years making difficult rooms comfortable. "I swore her myself back in January. County Commissioner, District 2. She looked at my mother with something that wasn't quite a smile. "I understand that's your district." The room had gone quiet the way rooms do when they sense something is happening, but haven't yet worked out what. My mother's glass tilted in her hand, not thrown, not dropped with drama, just a small, involuntary give in her grip, and the champagne flute slipped and shattered against the edge of the gift table, glass scattering thin and bright across the white cloth. Nobody moved for a second. My father half rose from his seat and then didn't finish the motion. My Aunt Patricia, still holding her own glass, set it down on the nearest table with a click loud enough to carry. "Diane," she said, low but not quiet enough. "Did you know about this?" My mother didn't answer her either. Brooke, beside Mitchell, had gone very still, the kind of stillness people adopt when they realize a story they've been telling about a family for years has just failed a fact-check in front of 40 witnesses. I did not say "I told you so." I did not say anything about the group chat, or the 11 people who had seen it, or the eviction notice folded into a coat pocket 11 years earlier. I looked at my mother, whose face had gone the particular pale of someone doing fast arithmetic on a number she didn't know she was carrying, and I said quietly, Happy anniversary, Mom. Then I reached down, picked up the two largest pieces of broken glass from the tablecloth so no one would cut themselves, and set them on a bread plate. Mitchell had come around the bar by then, Brooke a step behind him, his easy party voice gone. Nora, what? He started, and I let him finish the sentence before I answered, because I had promised myself I would let every one of them finish their sentences tonight. It cost me nothing, and it told me everything about who they were when they thought no one serious was watching. You told me to stay home, I said. I thought about it. I decided to come as myself instead. Judge Anand did not stay long, 20 minutes, exactly as she'd said, enough to accept a glass of water, decline the champagne, and speak briefly and warmly with my father, who could not stop apologizing for something he never quite named. At one point she leaned toward me and said, quietly enough that only I could hear it, "You didn't need me here, Nora. You'd already won this a long time ago. I just wanted to watch." I have thought about that sentence more than almost anything else from that night. Before she left, she found my Aunt Janet near the door and said, loud enough for 3 tables to hear, "Your niece ran one of the cleanest campaigns I've seen out of a first-time candidate. People who need someone to be small don't recover well from finding out she wasn't." Janet repeated that line to me twice more before the night was over, like she wanted to make sure I'd heard it the first time. Before I left that night, I said 3 things, one to each of them, and I chose the words on purpose. To my mother, I said, "You wanted family in good standing only. I checked. I qualify." To Mitchell, I said, "You told me to save everyone the awkwardness. I think I just did." To my father, who finally found something to say once the room had thinned out, a quiet, "I should have said something, Nora," offered at the coat check like a man setting down a bag he'd carried too long. I said only, "I know." Then I put my coat on and left before the band started the next song, because I had already gotten what I came for, and staying would have made it about them instead of about the truth. The 3 consequences did not arrive all at once. They arrived the way real consequences do, in sequence, over the following weeks, each one landing after the last had settled. The first came that same night, before dessert, when a woman I didn't recognize approached my table and introduced herself as a board member of the county's Affordable Housing Trust, someone my mother had invited months ago as a favor to a friend, with no idea the woman sat on a body whose funding decisions ran directly through my committee. She asked, in front of my mother, if I would be willing to speak at their spring gala. My mother sat through the entire exchange with her jaw tight and her hands folded, saying nothing, because there was nothing left for her to correct. The second came 4 days later, when Mitchell called me, not texted, called, and asked, without preamble, whether the flooring contract his company had bid on for the new county annex building was still moving forward, a contract that had nothing to do with my seat, that I had recused myself from discussing the moment I recognized the vendor list, precisely because I understood how easily a family's assumption that you owe them something can attach itself to any door left even slightly open. I told him I couldn't discuss it, and that he should direct procurement questions to the county's public bid office like anyone else. He was quiet for a long moment, and then he said, "I didn't mean the text like that." And I said, "I know exactly how you meant it, Mitchell," and I let the silence after that do the rest of the work. The third came 3 weeks later, at a smaller family dinner nobody had bothered to add no broke cousins to, when my mother, without looking at me directly, mentioned to my Aunt Patricia that Nora had always had a good head for public service, really, even as a girl. I did not correct the record. I let her have the sentence. I understood, by then, that it cost her more to say it than it would have cost me to argue with it. Colleen called me the next morning, the real one, the one from the couch, and asked how the dinner had actually gone once the story stopped being something I was telling other people and started being something just between us. I told her about the glass and the room and the 3 sentences at the coat check. She was quiet for a second, and then she said, "You know you didn't have to bring a federal judge to prove you were worth inviting." I told her she was right. I told her I hadn't done it to prove anything to them. I'd done it so I would never again have to wonder, at 3 in the morning, whether staying quiet all those years had meant they were right about me. Now I knew. They hadn't been. I want to tell you something now, because I think it matters more than the glass, more than the room going quiet, more than any of it. Setting a limit is not an attack. It is information. For 11 years, I let my family believe that my silence meant agreement, that my staying away from their comparisons meant I accepted the ranking they'd assigned me. When I finally showed up as exactly who I had become, without apology and without a speech, I wasn't punishing anyone. I was simply telling them, for the first time in words they couldn't misread, where my patience had actually run out. I think about my father a lot, more than I think about my mother or my brother, because his failure was quieter and somehow harder to forgive. It is one thing to be told, directly, that you are not enough. It is another to watch someone stand next to that verdict for 11 years, saying nothing, passing the potatoes, letting silence do the agreeing for him. I don't know yet what to do with that. I know I said I know to him at the coat check instead of it's okay, because it wasn't, and because I am done handing out forgiveness before anyone has actually earned it. You can love people who dismissed you and still refuse to fold yourself back into the shape they needed you to be. I love my father. I don't know, even now, if I love the version of my mother that shows up when an audience is watching, but I love the woman underneath it enough to hope she find her way back to something more honest. Love was never supposed to be a blank check, and for a long time in that family, mine was the only account anyone made withdrawals from. The people who chose to see me before any of this was proven: Colleen, who gave me a couch and never once asked when I'd be back on my feet; Rosa, who told me the title was the easy part; Priya, who swore me into a courtroom my family didn't attend, and then walked into a country club 8 months later because I asked her to. Those people are more my family than blood has ever managed to be on its own. Biology is a fact. Belonging, it turns out, is a choice people make about you, over and over, long before you ever need them to prove it. Walking away from people who have cast you as a supporting character in a story about themselves is not bitterness. It's arithmetic. You cannot keep growing in a room built entirely around someone else's comfort, and I had spent 11 years trying. Peace has a way of announcing itself in the smallest details: an inbox that no longer holds a folder marked anniversary, a phone that no longer buzzes with a group chat deciding who counts as family this month. And the quiet on the other side of all of it, the mornings now when no one is ranking me against my brother over coffee, when no group chat is deciding without my input what kind of relative I'm allowed to be. That quiet is an emptiness. That's what peace was supposed to feel like the whole time. I just hadn't had the chance to compare it to anything before. My mother called me the one who'd never amount to anything at that dinner table when I was 24 because she thought that judgment was a ceiling she was allowed to hand down. She never imagined it would turn out to be the starting line. I want to know, have you ever been the one your family counted out? Because if you have, you already know exactly how the rest of this story feels, even the parts one didn't say out loud. The story you just heard was inspired by real experiences shared on public platforms including Reddit and other online communities. It has been thoughtfully adapted and reimagined for storytelling purposes. All characters, situations, names, and settings are fictional, altered, or generated using AI tools. Any resemblance to real individuals or events is entirely coincidental and unintentional. This story was created to deliver positive messages, emotional insight, and meaningful reflection, not to represent or defame any real person or situation.